And let me share my screen. Right. Yeah. Right. Zoom offers now different ways to share my screen, but I think that this is still the best way to do it, so it takes up the whole screen. So it's good to see everybody. Again, thank you for understanding about my being split with having to be with the religious school besides Talmud class. And it's good to start another year of Talmud class. I know we've been doing this for a long time, 31 years. I said to the kids today, I'm starting my 32nd year as rabbi at Sharei Tefillah, and I realized that as of February, this coming February, I will have spent half my life as the rabbi, exactly half my life as the rabbi of Sharei Tefillah, which is kind of freaky to think about. So I'll say the bracha momentarily. We left off at right before a Mishnah, so it's a great place to start the year with a new topic at hand. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we're in Baba Kama. We are on page 117 in the Koran PDF of it, or 21a if you're looking at any like Safaria or whatever else. So this chapter has been dealing with so far about people sharing property and what are expectations if somebody wants to put, like it started with, if somebody wants to put a wall in a courtyard or a fence in a field, who has what is the right, how much right do they have, and then if they share property too, is one able to have some kind of business in the downstairs while somebody else is upstairs, and what kind of business it is might affect someone else's privacy, etc. So it's that we left off with that is now continuing in a new Mishnah. Okay, so if a resident wants to open a store in his courtyard, his neighbor can protest to prevent him from doing so and say to him, I am unable to sleep due to the sound of people entering the store and the sound of people exiting. Okay, so let's get the scenario down again. Like, it's kind of hard to picture this because homes aren't built this way. Some homes in medieval Europe were built this way, and in the Middle East they're built this way. So you enter into what looks like an entrance to one home, but when you enter, there's a courtyard, and then there could be multiple residents around that courtyard. So if one of those residents wants to open a store in his courtyards, I guess his part of the courtyard, his neighbor can protest to prevent him from doing so and say, I'm unable to sleep due to the sound of people entering the store and the sound of people exiting. So in other words, right, the store, that is, you're opening up a private courtyard to become public, or to be public sometimes, that is, when people are coming to the store. So people coming to the store, and this would be, I don't know what the hours are, but it's not like a boutique shop that might be open at 10 and close at 5. This could be something that opens, if it's a bakery, then it opens at dawn. But any other business might open pretty early in the morning, and maybe some people want to sleep, and they can't sleep late because of all the noise of people coming to the store. Now, there's a halacha here on the side a store in his courtyard. Just want to adjust. There we go. So if one opens up a store or factory in his courtyard, so this doesn't say anything about a factory, but his neighbors can prevent him from selling his wares there by claiming that the traffic of customers is disruptive. Some commentaries rule that if the neighbors did not protest for 3 years, his position is established and they can no longer force him to move. So in other words, if the neighbors don't complain about it, then the person's allowed to have it. And if he has it for 3 years, then that's it. They're not allowed to complain anymore. It's permitted for him to engage in this work in his house. Okay, well, we'll get to the house because the rest of the Mishnah talks about that. So the courtyard, you can't open if another resident protests, then another resident cannot open a store in the courtyard. But the Mishnah continues, but one may fashion utensils in his house and go out and sell them in the market, despite the fact that he is not allowed to set up a store in the courtyard. And the neighbor cannot protest against him doing so and say to him, I'm unable to sleep due to the sound of the hammer you use to fashion utensils, nor can he say, I cannot sleep due to the sound of the mill that you use to grind, nor can he say, I cannot sleep due to the sound of the children. It's permitted for one to make reasonable use of his own home. All right, so the Mishnah throws something in there at the end that's related to noise, but it's not related to business. So you can't have a store, that is, you can't have an opportunity for the public to invade private property or shared private property. But you can use your house in order and make noise in your house for your business. And your neighbors don't have the right to complain about it. Now, the Gemara might get into what's the limit about how loud it can be. So a reasonable business. So I don't know if this is like a blacksmith. A blacksmith uses a hammer, or is it a jeweler who uses a hammer? Right? The hammer blow for a jeweler is less noisy than a hammer blow for a blacksmith, let's say. But like I said, maybe the Gemara will get into this. But you're allowed to make noise in your house, reasonable noise for your business. But then it also says at the end, another resident is not allowed to complain about the sound of children coming from a house. Now, so that's an issue too. I've lived in a single family home for a long time, but I can imagine, and there are TV shows and movies about this in apartment buildings. The sound of children crying kind of goes through the walls, and it could be, it can be bothersome to neighbors. But there's really, it's one thing if a neighbor has a daycare in their apartment that could be unlicensed, that the neighbors can complain about that. But if it's their own family, there's nothing really you can do about the noise coming from another apartment. The same here in the Mishnah. The sound of children is not reason for a neighbor to complain. Okay, any questions about this before we go on to the Gemara? Okay, so the Gemara asks, what is different in the first clause of the Mishnah, which states that one can prevent his neighbor from opening a store in the courtyard because the noise keeps him awake? And what's different in the latter clause, which states that one cannot protest when his neighbor performs labor that is noisy? All right, so I added, in my explanation of the Mishnah, I added something about how it's private property becoming public property. The Mishnah doesn't say that. That's my assumption of the difference between the noise of having a store in the private courtyard versus just doing business-related stuff in your house that makes noise. Okay, so that was my reason I came up with as I was explaining it. But the Gemara wants to know, what is the difference? Noise is noise. So why are you allowed to complain about the noise of a store being set up, but you're not allowed to complain about noise coming from somebody else's apartment for their own business? Abaye said, in the latter clause, now it's interesting that Abaye is fourth generation of Talmudic rabbis, fourth out of sixth. And so there was nobody in the prior generations who had an answer to this question. Like, why does it wait until the fourth generation of rabbis until we get an answer to the difference between the first and second clause of the Mishnah? So Abaye said, in the latter clause, that is, conducting work for your business in your house, we arrive at the case of one who operates in another courtyard. That is, one cannot prevent activity in a separate courtyard that is connected to the alleyway in which he lives. So in other words, Abaye is adding an explanation to this that's not really based on the Mishnah. We're assuming one square courtyard with people living around it. Abaye is thinking that there's like some other courtyard off to the side that he's doing the work in. Rava said to him, if so, let it teach that in a different courtyard it is permitted. Why does the Mishnah not specify that it is referring to a different courtyard, right? So in other words, why is Abaye adding this extra stuff here to try to explain it when it doesn't seem like the Mishnah is talking about that? That's Rava's problem with Abaye's explanation. So it goes on. In the latter clause, we arrive at the case of school children who come to learn Torah in his house, and this ruling applies from the time of the ordinance of Yehoshua ben Gamla and onward. So, the sound of children, the noise of children, so that's Rava is suggesting that this is what this is referring to, like you have a school, some kind of Beit Midrash or Cheder meeting in your house. And this applies to a ruling of Yehoshua ben Gamla. And what is this ordinance? As Rav Yehuda says, that Rav says, truly that man is remembered for the good, and his name is Yehoshua ben Gamla. If not for him, the Torah would have been forgotten from the Jewish people. Initially, whoever had a father would have his father teach him Torah, and whoever did not have a father would not learn Torah at all. The Gemara explains, what verse do they interpret homiletically that allowed them to conduct themselves in this manner? They interpret the verse that says, and you shall teach them to your sons, to mean, and you yourselves shall teach. That is, your fathers shall teach your sons. Now, this is classic. This is Deuteronomy 11, is the middle paragraph of the three paragraphs after the Shema. So we have in the first paragraph, in the V'yahavta paragraph, a commandment, V'shinantam levanecha, and you shall teach your sons. But in the middle paragraph, the V'haya im Shemoah paragraph, we have the commandment, where is it? Velimadetem otam, you shall teach them. And so the them being the laws, but they're changing. You have to look at the Hebrew. The limadetem otam. Remember, Torah is written without vowels. So with vowels, we're supposed to read it as otam. But without vowels, we can also read it as atem. You yourselves shall do the teaching. So, in other words, as I say when we pass the Torah down from grandparents to parents to bar or bat mitzvah, The commandment is for parents to teach their children. And if parents don't have the skills to be able to teach Jewish tradition to children, then we hire teachers to do so. Okay, so what this is getting to is the history of that idea of setting up Jewish schools or hiring what's known as a malamed. Like back in the shtetl days, there would be a malamed who would come to town and would set up classes, and parents would pay the malamed to teach their children, either private tutoring or setting up a group class. So there are different models of how Jewish education was done over the centuries. So, the whole idea of Hebrew school today or Jewish day school is just another iteration of how parents fulfill the mitzvah of teaching their children by sending children to religious school or day school. Okay, yes, Julian.
I couldn't find the raise your hand.
Oh, it's okay. No, it's fine. I see you.
Um, I oftentimes have a problem with stuff like this where it talks about children. So, what's the definition of a child? Is it anybody under the age of 13 or 18?
Oh, I know it's an interesting point. Right. Um, so I think there are elsewhere in rabbinic literature, we're told how young a child can start learning. Also, how young, if you're short a minyan, how young can you go to count someone in a pinch? So, um, so I think Pirkei Avot talks about different ages and when we're supposed to start learning. We're told that as long as a child knows how to recite the Shema and knows what the Shema means. In other words, not just recite it by memory, but also understand that when you're saying the Shema, you're talking about believing in one God. However young that is, you can count that child in a pinch to make a minyan. But how long does Jewish learning go? That's a question too. So I'm not sure about that, Julian. We can't really apply educational standards today to what it was back in the day. Because there are competing influences, kids need to work the farm, stuff like that. And bar mitzvah, did bar mitzvah mark the end of a formal study in a classroom or with a tutor? I don't know offhand the answer to that question, Julian. So, but for our purposes here, what the Mishnah talking about back here, the sound of children, that fellow residents can't complain about the sound of children, is leading the Gemara to talk about, they must be talking about a school being set up there. So now they're reminding us of this guy, Yehoshua ben Gamla, who came up with the idea of setting up a school. Let's just look at the personalities because where is it? There it is. Yehoshua ben Gamla was one of the last high priests during the Second Temple period. He is mentioned by Josephus as Yehoshua ben Gamliel. He was appointed as high priest by King Agrippa II and was killed during the destruction of the temple. Some authorities maintain that there were two individuals by this name, although this is probably incorrect. While the sages disapproved of the way he attained his office, that is, a king appointed him, and the king was actually appointed by the Roman emperor. So the whole thing was just called into question. They nevertheless enumerated his achievements. He's praised for having donated golden lottery cards to the temple, as well as for his efforts to promote Jewish education by establishing a wide-ranging system of schools in every town and region, as described by the Gemara here. So it's thanks to Yehoshua ben Gamla that there are schools all around the land of Israel and setting up that whole system. So, yes, Marlene.
Yeah, so a question. So was it are we supposed to understand really that back then they were when they said the schools were really set up just for boys? For instance,
Oh,
like teachers' sons, or is it girls included? Do we know?
so, well, there are examples of women, um, rabbis' wives, who are extremely knowledgeable in their own right. So, how did they become knowledgeable in their own right? So, is it like Yentl? Did they dress up as boys in order to attend school? Or were girls allowed to study? I don't know the historically accurate answer to that question. So, in Eastern Europe, in Ashkenazi communities, it was common to teach girls, but girls learned in a different manner than boys did. So, there's a classic Torah commentary written specifically for girls in Yiddish called Se'ena Ure'ena. So, which Hebrew in grammatical Hebrew means go out and see, but you female go out and you female see. So, in other words, a commentary written for girls as they're studying the Torah, written in Yiddish. So Marlene, as the answer to your question for the time of the rabbis, I don't have the answer to. I mean, we all know in traditional Jewish circles today, like the more Orthodox the community it is, the more segregated Jewish learning is, so that at least by high school, boys and girls are separated for what they would say in these high schools, Limudei Kodesh, holy studies, Jewish text study. So why there needs to be segregation, I don't know. And it's fascinating that in some of these segregated programs that it is a male rabbi who's teaching girls. So that kind of defeats the purpose of the segregation. But I don't know if there was segregation by gender in the time of the rabbis. I don't know. Like I said, I can only give you the example of Bruria, Rabbi Meir's wife, and Rabbi Gamliel's wife. Her name was Ima Shalom. So those two, we have stories in the Talmud about them and their knowledge. So is their knowledge because their husbands taught them, or was it independent? So don't know. Okay. So yeah. Yes.
Two questions not related to each other.
Okay.
Beit Yaakov, the word
Yes.
not for women? And when was
Yeah.
that?
So you have to pronounce it Beis Yaakov because it's only in the ultra-Orthodox circles that you have schools for girls known as Beis Yaakov schools. Yeah, but it's in the ultra-Orthodox world. Yeah.
My other question is the the golden lottery cards from the temple.
So yes.
What's
So
that?
that's a reference to Yom Kippur when you have the two goats brought to the high priest, and he has to draw lots as to which one's going to be sacrificed and which one's going to be led out into the wilderness as the scapegoat. So the drawing of the lots, so this Yehoshua ben Gamla decided to make them golden cards. So, yeah, there are stories like this. Also, there was a woman queen during the time of the Hasmoneans who donated a golden placard that was in the temple, which were the words for the sota ritual, when a husband would bring up his wife on charges of being unfaithful without any proof, but just brought her up on charges. It would be resolved in the temple by having words of a prayer or a legal formula written on parchment and then dissolved in a glass of water, mixed also with dirt from the floor of the sanctuary. So where are those words so that they'd be readily accessible? This queen had them written on a gold placard in the temple. So there are examples like this of these things being donated by wealthy people for the sake of the ritual.
I
Okay.
have a question,
Yes.
Paul. So
Yes.
going back to the girls,
Yeah.
time of the rabbis, weren't girls married off really young, so that would curtail their education?
So that also is unclear. I mean, the rabbis do talk about how children as young as 3 could get engaged, but actually married, you really don't. The rabbis, I think, agree that you can only get married if you are physically mature. So that is that your body has gone through puberty. So so a boy can't get married until the rabbis say 11 or 12. Girls can't get married until 9. So yes, that certainly would impact education. It's also unclear why rabbis would allow children to marry at such a young age. Not sure what the other factors are that go into having children get married so young. So there are other factors there, but this factor related to trying to understand girls studying, and also the more general question that Julian started with, how young do kids start and up to what age do they study? I really don't know. You could Google it, and I could also Google it myself for next time, but an answer isn't, I don't know the answer to this off the top of my head. Okay, so back to this midrash about from the second paragraph of the Shema of how we are supposed to teach, our fathers are supposed to teach their sons. When the sages saw that not everyone was capable of teaching their children and Torah study was declining, they instituted an ordinance that teachers of children should be established in Jerusalem. The Gemara explains, what verse did they interpret homiletically that enabled them to do this? Like, in other words, what was the authority from the Bible that provided them the wherewithal to set up this whole system? In other words, kind of setting it up in order for to not just to suggest, but to impose the commandment that everybody needs to study, right? What's the basis for setting up a school system, a mandated school system for the population, as opposed to being voluntary? Okay, so the verse from Isaiah, for Torah emerges from Zion. That is, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, right? So it's part of the Torah service itself when we put the Torah back in the ark. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah. So Torah emerges from Zion. Zion, another name for Jerusalem. But still, whoever had a father, his father ascended with him to Jerusalem and had him taught. But whoever did not have a father, he did not ascend and learn. So there's still the tradition. If you have a father, your father's supposed to teach you. If you don't have a father, it doesn't matter that there's a school in Jerusalem. You don't study because the commandment is for father to teach son. Therefore, the sages instituted an ordinance that teachers of children should be established in one city in each and every region. And they brought the students in at the age of 16 and at the age of 17. So, in other words, I guess they kept on studying till they were 16 or 17. So, wait, is that one? Yes, 16 and 17. So at the age of 16, this note, since the students had to travel a lengthy distance, children were not taken to study, whereas teens were capable of making the journey. So Okay, so this is like a high school that they're setting up, a senior high school. But as students were old and had not yet had any formal education, a student whose teacher grew angry at him would rebel against him and leave. It was impossible to hold the youths there against their will. This state of affairs continued until Yehoshua ben Gamla came and instituted an ordinance that teachers of children should be established in each and every province and in each and every town, and that they would bring the children in to learn at the age of 6 and at the age of 7. Okay, Julian? So here we have the basis that schooling starts either at 6 or 7. With regard to the matter at hand, since this system was established for the masses, the neighbors cannot prevent a scholar from teaching Torah in the courtyard. Okay, so in other words, if this system now is instituted around the country and in every single town, then, where you're going to build a separate building, or you're going to have it in people's homes. So if it's going to be in people's homes, then neighbors cannot complain about it because this is an ordinance coming from the rabbis.
Jonah,
Yes, Bess?
what is the source in my back of my mind for when a child is 3 to open the Torah, give him honey on his finger? Or
So when study begins, you start with studying the book of Leviticus, and you're supposed to put some honey on the first piece of paper that the kids are studying from. In fact, so if you read Daniel Gordis's Israel from the Inside, I think last week he quoted something from Jonathan Polin, Hirsch Goldberg's father, talking about when you are in mourning, some people have the tradition that you're supposed to lead the service because you're saying Kaddish, and that gives you the Hebrew term is a chazaka. You have the right of first refusal to be leading the davening. But Jonathan said that he didn't want to do that until the year of mourning for his son was over. So the first Shabbat after the mourning was over, he led the preliminary service. And also on that Shabbat was a ceremony for first graders in their synagogue community who had just started school that week. And it was something with honey there. So first graders, that's 6 or 7 at the most, and that here's the Talmudic story for that. And then there's an example that in a synagogue in Jerusalem where these kids are honored in that way with honey. Yeah, so that studies should be sweet as honey.
Can I ask a question?
Yes. So
It
hi.
seems to me that since Gamla was appointed through the Roman Empire, was he a maverick of such that because they would object to setting up schools of learning?
Right. So I think the background that I read alluded to the idea, even though the rabbis objected to him being the high priest because of how he was appointed, they still liked some of the things he did, like the golden lottery cards and also setting up this school system. So even though they didn't like the way he was appointed, they like the stuff that he did. Okay, so as opposed to some other high priests where I think there's a story of rabbis throwing an etrogs at him during the holiday of Sukkot, and I forget which high priest that was. So this one they liked, and I don't know at what point during the first century CE that he was the high priest, but yeah. So they're agreeing, the rabbis are agreeing that this ordinance was a good thing. And related to our particular Mishnah, because they agree with the ordinance, and therefore it becomes a Jewish ordinance, then if a school gets set up in someone's home in a courtyard, neighbors can't complain about the noise of children studying. So, what kind of noise? Well, if you've ever, I've been in Jerusalem, for example, during the school year, and when the windows are open, you can hear kids kind of like reciting after the teacher. And it's loud, but to me, it sounds nice because it's kids studying and learning. But other people, it's like kids in shul, right? Either the sound that kids make in shul is lovely, or people say, get that kid out of here, right? So it all depends on the personality of the person who is listening to the sound. Okay, so concerning that same issue, we go on in the Gemara. Rav said to Rav Shmuel bar Shelat, a teacher who was a teacher of children, do not accept a student before the age of 6, as he is too young, and it's difficult for him to learn in a steady manner. So, it raises the question now of preschool, and is preschool mandated, right? Like, so you have mandated, like the state of Maryland has, a pre-K that is paid for, right? So which gets into the whole question of synagogues having preschools, and if they do a 4-year-old class, will there be 4-year-olds who are coming to it, or are parents going to take advantage of free pre-K? So that's always a question in states as to what they're going to be spending money on, and how young do they start mandating public school for kids. So the rabbis are saying 6 is the age when a kid can really start focusing, right? And so when do they start teaching reading? I think now they do start teaching at 5 in kindergarten. There are some preschool, there are, of course, precocious kids who know how to read ahead of time, but kindergarten is really the time when kids are expected to start being able to read, and then by 1st grade, you have to be at a particular level before you start getting into providing resources for kids with learning issues and stuff like that. So that's a whole other issue that the rabbis are not going to be talking about. Special ed is not something that rabbis would be talking about. But here they're saying we start when they're 6 because they can start learning in a steady manner. From this point forward, accept him and stuff him with Torah like an ox, right? So, that's the traditional ultra-Orthodox style. You start first thing in the morning and you go all day. And Rav further said to Rav Shmuel bar Shelat, when you strike a child for educational purposes, hit him only with the strap of a sandal, which is small and does not cause pain. Rav further advised him, he who reads, let him read on his own. Whoever does not read, let him be a companion to his friends, which will encourage him to learn to read. Okay, so that's interesting, that if you're a 6-year-old and you don't know how to read yet, then you create a buddy system, so maybe the kid will pick it up. Okay, so there's a note there about that. Let him be a companion to his friends. In other words, he should not be punished or expelled, but left to the company of his friends who do read, and ultimately he too will want to read. Alternatively, by listening to his friends read, he will learn from them. All right, so it's interesting. The rabbis who don't know anything about special ed or different strategies, or didn't know about dyslexia, all these things now that teachers have to know about, and special ed teachers especially have to know about, rabbis didn't know about. But they did know that kids learned in different ways. And here's one such example coming out in this story. A kid who doesn't know how to read yet at age 6 or 7, find a buddy for him, and hopefully something will kick in. And kids with dyslexia are usually extremely bright and have a wherewithal to be able to memorize, or just have this. So it's not, I'm not gossiping or anything like this, but there's a kid, Max Schwartz, Jeff Schwartz's son, who severe dyslexia, goes to a special school just for kids with dyslexia. But when he became bar mitzvah, there's a limit at that time. I say this, when one has dyslexia, it's not only difficult to learn your own language and how to read your own language, but to then learn a different language with different letters that go in a different direction. You can imagine how complicated and challenging and frustrating that can be. So that's where the issue of memorization comes in, and Max was able to participate in the service that Shabbat morning by actually memorizing the Torah reading and memorizing. I don't think he did a Haftarah, he just memorized the Torah reading that morning. So it's just incredible how your mind can compensate for things that don't work in another way to make it work. So the rabbis, not knowing exactly what dyslexia was, but knew that some kids could read and some kids couldn't. Well, here's a mechanism that we could try to do to have a kid learn anyway. Okay, it's 10:27, and so let's stop here for today, and we'll meet again next Sunday. So let's stop share. So wish everybody a good rest of the day, and see you next week.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care.